You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. In April 2024, the Everett School District launched a third-party investigation into a teacher at Henry M. Jackson High School over allegations of an inappropriate physical relationship with a student. The subsequent report, reviewed by KUOW, includes copies of hundreds of texts between the teacher and student. They include the teacher reminiscing about, quote, giving you a hug, you laying on me, and holding your hand, end quote. There are mentions of kisses and wishes to nap together. The two also express worry at one point that they might have been spotted by someone when the student was lying on the teacher in the back of his car. We reached out to the teacher, Kevin KUOW, but he never responded. In the report, he denies that he and the student were sexually involved. He says their relationship was more familial, and that the kisses mentioned were metaphorical ones, and that he rebuffed some physical contact. He was investigated by police, but was never charged with a crime. In the school district's investigation, though, KUOW did admit to having violated nearly all of the district's procedures on maintaining professional staff-student boundaries. Later that year, KUOW resigned. Not long after, he voluntarily gave up his K-12 teaching license. That decision stopped further investigation and the gears of oversight meant to provide transparency about problem teachers. Policies known as preventing a practice dubbed pass the trash. KUOW later got a job teaching at Shoreline Community College. This has all come to light because of reporting from InvestigateWest and the Daily Herald of Everett. Their story raises questions about whether current laws do enough to protect vulnerable students, how teachers facing serious allegations can evade scrutiny, and whether it's too easy for those same teachers to join new classrooms. And the reporters behind that story join me now to talk more. Moe Clark is with InvestigateWest. She's an investigative reporter there. Welcome, Moe.
Thanks for having me.
And Eliza Aronson is an investigative reporter for the Daily Herald in Everett. Eliza, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's go back to that April 2024 timeline when Mill Creek Police opened the case. First off, who is Kevin KUOW, and why did the police department launch an investigation into his alleged conduct?
So Kevin KUOW was a teacher at the high school for about 10 years. He's actually co-head of the physics department. He taught AP physics. The investigation was launched after a custodian found a student giving him a back massage in his locked classroom. The custodian reported it to the school, and the school hired a third-party investigator. And then the third-party investigator started reviewing what he had access to, which was text messages between the two, quickly realized that this was maybe a police matter and contacted the police.
And so there's those two investigations almost going on simultaneously then. There's the third-party investigator hired by the district, and then there's the police investigation. The police investigation lasts about 10 days. The district investigation goes on longer. Eliza, we should be clear here. You all never talked to Kevin KUOW, right? What was that like trying to reach out to him?
Yeah, so Moe had reached out, as we did with all of our sources and people involved. And I think we had given him a week, and a day before we were sending it to print of the deadline that we had given him, he reached back out to Moe, and she gave him a 24-hour extension, and he did not follow up.
Got it. And you had these text messages that were from the investigations that had gone on. Kevin KUOW has never been convicted of a crime. The police said that there was not sufficient evidence of a physical relationship. You all did review these text messages between KUOW and the student. What did you see in these text messages?
I mean, we saw enough in the text messages to really point to the question of why wasn't anything done about this. I mean, there were text messages referencing kissing, laying together in the back of his car.
The student's DNA all over his car, referencing being pinned against a wall.
And these text messages, not 5, 10, 1,000 spanning years of texting every day. And like those, like you said, those references to DNA, pinning him against a wall, talking about being scared of people seeing them together, laying in the back of his car together.
Evading the principal,
right?
Things
yes.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the custodian reports seeing Kukla getting this back massage from a teenage student, high school student. The district starts the investigation by the third-party investigator. The police are investigating at the same time. What happens with the police investigation? How does it end up concluding? What happens during that investigation as far as you know, and why does it end?
And just one clarifying thing. So the third-party investigation actually paused during the law enforcement investigation, which that's common. They don't want to, interrupt what the police are doing.
Got it.
So during that time, the detective talked to the student, tried to talk to the teacher. He originally said he would speak to the police, and then instead a lawyer called the police detective and said, my client's not going to sit for an interview. The detective talked to the custodian and the principal. What I found really interesting was that when the detective with the Mill Creek Police Department, when he talked to the principal shared two other sort of concerning behaviors that were already brought to the administration's attention. That's common in cases like this. It's missed red flags.
What were those missed red flags?
Yeah, the first was that someone reported that she was bringing food for him a lot, which exchanging of gifts is definitely a sign that grooming is underway.
And the principal talked to Kukla about receiving these lunches, right?
Yeah, and the quote in the police investigation that really stuck in my head was he spoke to the teacher about perception of misconduct or something. It wasn't like that it was actually wrong. It was just this might look bad. And the principal saying oh, I didn't know this was ongoing conduct. I thought it was a one-off thing. And really that should have been the first sign that he had a more intimate relationship going on with this student. Also in the text messages, they, were checking in to make sure each other ate, saying good morning, saying good night, talking on the phone a lot. He gave her rides home from school a lot, which researchers say is a big, grooming sign. Yeah.
How much of that was, we know the lunches were something that the principal had zeroed in on before this, criminal investigation happened. How much of these other behaviors, like the rides home, things like that, were known to the school ahead of the back massage incident?
That wasn't clear from our reporting. There was one other report made to the school, which the principal disclosed during the investigation. Every school district has a rule. You can't be alone in a classroom, alone with a student, and you have to be able to see through the windows. And he was covering up the windows. During the investigation, the investigator went to the school and the windows were still covered. So that wasn't addressed. And that also should have been a huge red flag.
Okay, so at this point, the district's investigation into Kevin Kukla, the teacher in Everett, is on pause. Well, the police investigation at Mill Creek is going forward. The police investigator spends about 10 days on this case. And what happens, Moe, at the conclusion of this case? What do you know about how the criminal investigation ended?
So he wrote in his police report that he forwarded to the prosecutor that he didn't think he had probable cause to prove that there was a physical relationship going on, which that would be for the sexual misconduct with a minor charge. He wrote that in his report and sent to the prosecutor to see if they agreed. And they agreed based off of his 10-day investigation that they didn't have enough to charge. Later, when the report came out from the third-party investigator, that really highlighted some areas that the detective either missed or didn't focus on. And that's where we learned a lot more about this case, was from the third-party investigation.
So the police investigation closes. The district investigation picks back up. In June 2024, this third-party investigator for the district actually interviews Kevin Kukla, the teacher. How did that go? What did you learn when you reviewed what's known about that part of the investigation?
Yeah, so it was about a 3-hour conversation. During the interview, Kukla denied having any romantic or physical relationship with the student. He described it as a friendship. He said he was more of a father figure to her. And when the investigator asked about the text messages, including text messages that talked about kissing, he said it was a metaphor and that he didn't mean it. And it was actually cut short because Kukla kept excusing himself to go vomit. He was extremely anxious the entire time. And the investigator basically said, go home, take care of yourself, and we'll pick back up. But a few days later, Kukla resigns, which cut the investigation short.
So with Kukla's resignation, what happens to the district's investigation into the alleged misconduct?
They did continue investigating. And then a few months later, they did report it to the state in September, saying that they had probable cause that he broke a lot of professional boundaries with the student and that it might be worth looking into by the state to see if he should lose his teaching license.
Okay, so the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction is now looking at Kevin Kukla. He has already resigned his job, but OSPI is saying, should this person lose their license, basically? Did they cross professional boundaries? What happens with that investigation?
So that one was initiated once the Everett School District superintendent reached out. The superintendent wrote in the complaint that he had broken professional student boundary policy that they had. The teachers union attorney reached out to OSPI's investigator looking for an update on the case. And they sort of went back and forth. We know this from a string of emails that we got through a public records request. And ultimately, the OSPI investigator offered that Kukla could voluntarily surrender his teaching license to stop the investigation, which in previous reporting, I had been told that that wasn't their procedure. And I've learned since that they're not always going out there and saying, hey, you can just revoke it yourself and we'll stop looking into you.
Here's one weird trick to stop the investigation into your professional alleged misconduct.
Yeah. And, through this reporting, they were like, well, yeah, we do have that tool. We can suggest it if it seems clear that wrongdoing has been done. And they sort of see it as an opportunity to get the teacher out of the classroom as quick as possible. But in this case, the teacher had already resigned. He was no longer with the school district, and he had moved on to a community college.
So let me just underline this. So basically, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction has these investigators. They are communicating with the Washington Education Association, the union lawyer for Kevin Kukla, and OSPI's investigator proactively offers your client can just surrender his K-12 teaching license, and that makes this investigation go away.
Yeah. He also said he had to agree to not seek reinstatement. So someone can voluntarily revoke their license and apply later. They just have to disclose why they revoked it themselves. But part of that exchange was that he agreed to not seek it. And he went to a community college where you don't need a K-12 teaching license. So, it didn't matter to him at that point.
So Kukla has this new job at Shoreline Community College. He surrenders his license, and that's the end. OSPI closes the case. Doesn't that go against this idea of transparency, of the work, state lawmakers have done to try to shed more light on alleged misconduct and make sure that problem teachers do not bounce to other roles? What did OSPI say when you asked them about this?
They talked about how it was an important tool that they have to get a teacher out of a classroom if they are unsafe to be around students. Someone can also voluntarily revoke or surrender their license if, they're retiring, and just there are other reasons someone could voluntarily revoke their own license.
So we have this situation where a criminal investigation into this situation was closed. Kevin Kukla, again, has not been convicted of a crime, but the reporting that was done by an independent investigator hired by the district says he broke professional conduct, and that's why they elevated it to OSPI, the state, And the state basically offers a way for him to walk away without any further investigation in order to sort of just end this conversation about what may or may not have taken place. Do I have that right?
Yes.
And so now, what does Shoreline Community College say about hiring Kevin Kukla, about what they knew when they hired him, about what kind of information was available for this person to then be put back in a classroom?
So when I reached out to ask if they knew about this, we sent the third-party investigation to Shoreline saying, have you seen this? They declined to talk with us and also declined to talk generally about how they background check new hires. They said that they did follow, or they are in compliance with the law that basically permits them to talk to previous employers. But the weird loophole that we found is that because the high school isn't higher education, they don't have to do that. So because he jumped from K through 12 to a community college, Shoreline wasn't required to check in.
So we don't know if they did or not. Basically, the Shoreline Community College hasn't said.
Yeah, so they wouldn't talk to me about what they knew when they hired him and kind of that process, but he was on their staffing list. I reached out to them, gave them the third-party investigation. His name disappeared from the staffing list. And then we followed up saying, is he still employed? They wouldn't answer our question, saying they had privacy concerns. And we did file a public records request, and they actually did end up emailing me back saying that he was assigned to home.
So still on staff, but assigned to home.
Right.
So at this point, I have to ask, because Kevin Kukla did surrender voluntarily his K through 12 license, so he's not teaching in high schools anymore. Somebody moving on to higher education and to, a job that is ostensibly you would mostly be teaching people who were above 18. Does that change the way that the state or any oversight body would be, approaching this as like a employment transparency thing to try to keep the system accountable for where teachers with allegations go? Like, does it matter that this is a college and not another high school?
So there are running start programs at community colleges where high school students take classes. He was actually in the transitional department, which runs this program. I think sometimes what gets lost in this topic is, like, even if students are 18 in college, it is still illegal for a teacher to engage sexually with a student. The teacher is in a position of power. And it's important for there to be communication between K through 12 and higher education because, if there's indications that someone is grooming someone, a vulnerable student, if they've engaged in boundary violations, that's absolutely something that a higher education institution should know about when they're hiring someone.
One expert that you spoke to described what happened here as a systemic failure. What kind of policy changes have you heard floated as a result of your investigation?
I have a story coming out about the reforms that folks would like to see. I have heard from many people a ban on stopping those state investigations if someone voluntarily surrenders. That seems like a pretty clear one. Closing that loophole that we talked about. I think this gets a little tricky with labor laws and union involvement, but there's certainly a pattern of teachers resigning to avoid these investigations. We saw this in this case. We've seen that in a lot of cases. And, school districts don't have to do that. They can tell them that they need to participate in this investigation or they will have something on their employment record or be terminated. Like, there is more that school districts could do to stop the quote unquote passing the trash. I think there's been sort of like a bigger push to get better training in schools to try to identify these like grooming patterns. It's pretty formulaic. Like once you see these sort of red flags, you can't really unsee them. And a lot of the researchers and advocates that we spoke to talked about that, how like students need to be trained, parents need to be trained, other teachers need to be trained to be like, oh, that's like weird adult behavior. That's not just like being friends with your teacher. That's like, we don't want that closeness.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard KUOW's podcast, Adults in the Room, but Isolde Raftery, my colleague here, and her team, they really explore what you just brought up, Mo, which is that like pattern of somebody in power pushing boundaries of a child. And sometimes that shows up as seeming like tough love or mentorship. But what is really happening is the slow erosion of personal boundaries.
Right. And we talked about that in the piece too. Like it can start out as hugging or just like small touches that gets the child used to being in physical contact. And also that the teacher can groom parents as well, because parents might not really understand what's going on or only see part of the picture. And so it is these intrusive, manipulative ways that, unless you're looking for them and know what to look for, can really just kind of hide in plain sight.
Is there anything else that has come out after you've reported this piece, or anything else you think the audience should know about what it took to get this reporting, to publish, and what you learned in the process of exploring this issue of teacher accountability, of the ways that the district, the police department, the state all approached this, and the result ultimately, which is, you know, somebody moving on and getting into a new classroom despite all of this cloud of questions around his conduct?
With any investigative reporting, you're trying to identify like the breakdown where the accountability needs to be. And I think this is a really good example showing a handful of institutions that all have the same goal of protecting students, and how each one dropped the ball. Each one did not want this story to come out. They did not want to talk to us. They passed the buck to the next person and said, I did my part. We closed our investigation. This teacher's no longer with our district. That's all we can do. And this is a national issue. It's extremely well documented by researchers. Yeah, it just was pretty alarming to see how strategic these institutions were in avoiding accountability and limiting access to information that I think we should have about our public schools. These are all public institutions, and you know.
Well, and the fact that I think all three institutions could get away, and the fact that there were so many loopholes and gaps in the process that you would think there would be enough layers that there would be accountability, and he kept slipping through and being able to proceed with his career without consequences.
That's Eliza Aronson, an investigative reporter for the Daily Herald in Everett. And you also heard from Moe Clark, an investigative reporter for InvestigateWest. They collaborated on this story. You can read this on the Herald and InvestigateWest website. It's called "An Everett Teacher Resigned Over a Relationship with a Student. Shoreline Community College Hired Him Months Later." Thank you both for being here and for explaining what you uncovered. I really appreciate the time and the effort that a story like this takes to bring to light.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.